Oh, those playoff rankings. They are a mystery, aren't they? Well, hopefully for the Buckeyes, Purdue is not much of a mystery on Saturday, as they have been difficult to solve for ranked teams throughout their history. Welcome to the voice of college football and Ohio State Buckeyes Live. Got Kevin Noon on the top there from Buckeye Scoop, Tony Gerdeman from Buckeye Scoop, and Steve Hillwagon, Bucknuts 247 Sports. Hey guys, how we doing?
Doing great.
Doing good.
All right, good to see everybody. And you all know the drill out there. Leave those comments, those questions, those debate topics in the live chat, and we will get to them as soon as possible. Of course, chronologically, we would go back to the Nebraska game, but everybody wants to talk about the playoff rankings. And since they were just released last night, Steve, let's start with you, because I talked about it for 3 hours last night after they were released. So I've got plenty to say on this, and people have plenty to say on it. What's your initial take? What do you think's important here?
I had a lot of things as I was watching it unfold. I was covering the Ohio State Akron game last night. The interviews were over, and we were all back in the room, in the workroom, watching Reese Davis and the guys go through the top 25. And it seemed like they took inordinately a long time to get from point A to point B. And spent, I mean, they put the first five up like 25-21 and spent like a minute discussing Utah. And I'm finally screaming in the work, no one cares about Utah! You know,
especially since they shouldn't be ranked.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like nobody. I mean, they're in there, and Penn State's not, and that's kind of the first thing that I think caught my attention. But then I really liked what they did with that whole Wisconsin, Purdue, Iowa cluster that they had. They seemed to have a pretty good handle on how that needed to go. Which at Purdue, I mean, I tweeted out that I didn't know how Purdue wasn't in the AP top 25. They're number 26. And how Auburn is like 17, and both teams are 6-3. And on game day, the highest ranked teams Auburn's beaten were both in the teens, Arkansas and Mississippi State. Whereas on game day, Purdue has beaten number 2 and number 3, one of whom is still in the top 10. The other one's still ranked as high or higher than Arkansas or Mississippi State are. And yet Auburn gets this special dispensation from the Pope that, you know, they got beat by double digits at Texas A&M. Well, they're still number 15 in my ballot. You know, it's like, give me a freaking break. I mean, I just don't know what people are looking at. But, you know, Auburn carries the cachet and Purdue doesn't. So, you know, whatever. But as we got to the top of it, I was stunned that Oklahoma is still as low as they are. Although they've got room, obviously, to move up. But Baylor and Oklahoma State here still to play. So, you know, I think as they win those games, you will see them inch a little higher, probably. I mean, Michigan State obviously have tough games here down the stretch. Michigan at Penn State, Michigan State at Ohio State, and then Michigan State, Penn State, the last game of the season, and Ohio State, Michigan, obviously. So I think one or both of them will fall by the wayside with a second loss, and potentially Oklahoma will, you know, rocket their way further up the list a little bit. Notre Dame is still lurking, which, you know, we can debate that. Their schedule this year is uncharacteristically soft compared to what it normally is. But then we get back up to the top, and Cincinnati is perfectly positioned at number 5. As I told our guys privately, what I think is going to happen is Georgia will beat Alabama. Alabama will go to the back of the line, and it'll be Georgia 1 versus Cincinnati 4 in a rematch of their bowl game from last year. And then I figure Ohio State, if they win these ranked games at the end, would eclipse Oregon and move ahead of them and be 2 versus 3. But that's all semantics. That's which side of the field you're on and what color jersey you wear. That's if Oregon can run the table. And, you know, that's what it would be in the other semifinal, a rematch from earlier in the season, which my recollection, I don't think we've ever had. Well, I guess wasn't there a rematch with did Notre Dame and Clemson? Was that a rematch just this past year? Is that right? Or
They had a rematch in the ACC championship game.
Oh, that was the rematch. Okay, thank you. I don't think the playoffs ever had a rematch, so maybe this is the year for that. And this is the year for Cincinnati. I think the committee made it pretty clear that they don't care if Cincinnati beats a 2-win team by 1 point. They're still going to be right where they are. They're looking at body of work, and I'm okay with that. They're not prisoners of the moment, although with Michigan State, they were prisoners of the moment. So I don't know. That's my long and short of it. I took about 3-4 minutes there of our time with my overall upshot of it, but maybe I'm off base on something, but I don't know. What did you guys think about how it all unfolded?
Well, obviously Oklahoma is where it is because it couldn't even beat anybody last week. Granted, they were off, but my view on Cincinnati is if there were 5 teams in the playoffs, Cincinnati would be 6. If there were 8 teams in the playoffs, Cincinnati would be 9. I just don't know. I think Cincinnati's just going to need some help. I mean, even if some things clear out in front of them, it's that whole group of 5 thing. Their 2 marquee wins. Indiana has proven to be nothing. And I know Notre Dame is 9, but Notre Dame for me, for whatever that's worth, I haven't been overly impressed with them. I mean, they're winning games like they're supposed to, but they're not necessarily going out and just putting teams on notice. But the only team that's really kind of doing that this year is UGA. I do have a big problem with Penn State not being ranked. Had a chance to talk to Mark a little bit before we went live. He mentioned Utah being a team that maybe doesn't need to be where it's at. I'm certainly with Steve on the Auburn situation. I think Auburn probably is just propped up because of the conference they're in. That little patch on the front of their jersey means more than the name on their jersey because I just don't see it there. It's interesting where head-to-head matters here and it doesn't matter there, and it just seems like we've already started to see the sliding scale, and we're only 2 weeks into the college football playoff rankings. So, Tony and I were on a show where we talked about this at length for an hour and 41 minutes. So I think I've put all my thoughts out there. So I'm still trying to regather them and see if I can come up with anything fresh. But at this point, I'm just not overly impressed with what the committee threw out there.
Yeah, I was shocked by the Penn State thing, especially when, as they're going down to revealing it, you have Auburn at 17, Wisconsin at 18, 2 teams that Penn State has beaten. And you just to see them continue to not show up was surprising to me, especially when the committee is instructed to take injuries into account, injuries, absences, COVID, all of these things into account. And I think we can all agree that if Sean Clifford had been healthy all season, they wouldn't have lost to Iowa and they wouldn't have lost to Illinois. He got knocked out of the Iowa game and with the lead, and the lead went away. Illinois, he was hobbled. He played, I think, the entire thing, but clearly he was not healthy. I mean, just watch him try to get through any of those 18 overtimes, and you would have seen a 60% Sean Clifford. And then he plays pretty well against Ohio State. Of course, they lose that, as they should, to Ohio State. So that was the main one for me. I was also shocked by the Michigan State thing. And I remember being after week 2, after Ohio State lost, saying head-to-head is not everything when it comes to this committee. It just depends on what they feel like that day. And clearly we saw head-to-head was not everything. Michigan State losing is what cost them. The amazing thing, though, was during the teleconference, Gary Barta said that they were even talking about Michigan State after the Michigan State game in terms of who should be ranked higher. And the very fact that they are talking about that the very week that one team just beat the other tells you that results on the field only matter if they like the results. And this is all going to be eventually an eye test. And I don't know, maybe it should. But I also felt coming off of this, the reason they said Ohio State and Oregon was still tied together, basically because both teams neither looked much better than the other this past week in their wins, meaning if Ohio State would just look better in their wins, they're going to go to 3. And if Ohio State looks better than Oregon in their wins, they'll jump Oregon. So head-to-head, I mean, it's pretty much out the window at this point if they feel one team is better than the other. I don't know from watching these two teams that you can't feel that Ohio State is better than Oregon right now, or at least in the last month, especially when they feel that Michigan is a more complete team than Michigan State from watching them all season long and over the last month, because that's what they said. They just feel Michigan is a more complete team offensively and defensively than Michigan State. I don't know if I agree with that, but that's where they are, and so that's the way they went. And it's always an interesting exercise in, I don't want to say excuse making, but excuse presentation from the committee when we get them on the phone to get them locked in on their words, only to see them go to the land of wind and ghosts one week and come up with something new the next week.
So let's look at these head-to-head comparisons between Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State, Oregon. So I'm going to, in one statement, defend the committee, but I'm also going to trash them, because if you're honoring head-to-head, okay, then we know who won the games. Once Ohio State and Oregon split after that game and went and played their individual schedules, nobody is going to debate who plays the tougher opponents. It's not even close. And who was more impressive against tougher opponents. And obviously that gap's only going to grow as Ohio State makes it through Purdue, Michigan State, Michigan in a Big Ten championship game. Otherwise, if they don't make it, it's null and void, versus what Oregon is playing right now, which is it's a horrendous schedule. Okay, so they honor the head-to-head there, even though Ohio State's resume is better otherwise, considerably better. Okay, Michigan State, I can understand coming away from that game and saying Michigan's got some questionable calls against them. They outplayed them much of the game. They were on the road, all those things, which would point to, okay, we're going to go the resume route. But if any two teams have a more similar comparison to make, Ohio State, Oregon, they're playing practically two different sports. But you put Michigan State, they've got three common opponents, and you really can't separate who was more dominant against those three common opponents: Nebraska, Rutgers, Indiana. Michigan State probably played a better non-conference opponent, especially the way they're playing right now, Miami, and won by 3 touchdowns. So I'm not getting where they can't honor that head-to-head, especially when there's an easier comparison to make between Michigan State and Michigan. That doesn't make sense to me. And again, Penn State and the opponents they've played, both beaten and lost to, and everything Tony just stated to clarify their situation, to put them against a Utah team that has the same record, that's lost to San Diego State, BYU, and Oregon State, which that's their Illinois loss right there. So if you're going to penalize Penn State, penalize Utah, and they've beaten nobody. UCLA's like their best win. Utah. Who have they beaten? Utah, UCLA, and Arizona State doesn't even come close to Penn State's performances and their schedule.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it on the head. I mean, I guess I like some of what they've done. I question some of what they've done, and my feeling is, as I said with my 1 versus 4 and 2 versus 3 breakdown, and I think Oklahoma is going to play their way into this discussion, and maybe even, to Kevin's point, beyond what Cincinnati can possibly do here at the end. It's killing them that SMU is losing games to really crappy teams. And so, I mean, Houston, these guys know I was pumping up Houston last week as a team that I loved, and then they went down to South Florida and kind of sleptwalked their way through that game. But, if they would potentially play them in the conference championship, maybe that's a chip in there on their behalf. I don't know. But I think it's all going to work out. I think barring an Armageddon scenario where we, have Georgia and then a bunch of 2-loss teams to choose from, I'm not sure where it's not going to work out. But Ohio State's not a bad hand, I don't think. I mean, this is going to be 4 very. I mean, the Penn State game was a tough game. The Nebraska game was a tough game. The next 3 look like they could all be tough games. And then Wisconsin's starting to play really good football here at the right time. That's going to be a physical game. You're talking about 6 very physical games in a row, emotional, physical, tough games that could go to the wire. I mean, they could blow out in Purdue, Michigan State, or Michigan. They could. I mean, if their offense is clicking and everything, they're running the football effectively. Those are some ifs, but Ohio State's got a lot of work to do in its own right, I feel.
Steve, I listen to you week after week, and I typically just sit here and nod my head and say, yes, Steve's right, everything. Yeah. Oh, Steve, you uttered the phrase that I can't stand. It'll work itself out. Please, Steve, don't say that. I kind of liken that to there's going to be a conclusion, meaning that if I'm $50,000 in debt and I've got a stack of bills that I can't pay, yeah, it's going to work itself out. I can't pay the bills. They're going to come get me, haul me in jail, trash my credit. Yeah, there'll be a conclusion to this situation, but it's not.
I just think there'll be a Final Four that everybody will believe holds water at the end. I think that's what we're hoping for, and I think it'll be pretty clear when we get to that point. There won't be a lot of ambiguity of who should be doing what to who. I think at that point, and honestly, if Cincinnati's 13-0 with the wins over Notre Dame, Indiana, one good team from their league, then they should be in, I suppose. But I don't know. From what Kevin said earlier, I can't detect if he meant that the powers that be are bound and determined to keep them out, or if they get to 13-0, they still don't deserve to be in. Can you clarify that comment, Mr. Noon?
Both. I mean, I don't think that they want to put a group of 5 team in there. And
take your pick.
And honestly, I've watched Houston play this year. They're fine. But the American Athletic Conference this year, for being Power 6, is not very good. And, I haven't really done a good job of following the computers this year to see what the computers think of Cincinnati or the conference in general. But I saw what I needed to see against Tulsa. When you fumble in that situation late in the fourth quarter, do not pass go. Do not collect $200. I believe, as the kids say, GTFO. That is what their chances are to get into the CFP. It's GTFO. It's just not going to happen. I mean, it really would take a lot of chaos for things to work themselves out for Cincinnati for them to be able to get in. So, you know what? They can put them 4. They could put them 5. They could put them 0.5 right now, that they're even above UC. It doesn't matter. We're going to get to the end of championship week, and they're going to find themselves 5, 6, 7, even if they are 13-0.
Can I say one thing about Alabama? Because again, I'm not sure exactly what they've done other than they have a win over Ole Miss at this point. The new thing, not the new thing, it happens, I guess, every year with the committee is, when they're talking about rankings, they're saying, well, this team has beaten 3 top 25 teams. This team has beaten 2 top 25 teams. Now what they've done for Alabama is now they say Alabama has beaten 5 teams over 500. So they're giving them the credit for beating Tennessee. Good job. The credit for beating Mississippi State, for beating Miami of Florida. All of these, no, they're not good enough to be ranked, but we're still going to cite them and say, good job beating these teams that we don't think are good enough to be in the top 25. But you did it. They're over 500. All of these 5 and 4 teams that you've beaten, that's good enough to put you where you are. And it goes back to whatever justification they want to use for Alabama to get them where they need them. They will have whatever justification they need. And I am still not convinced that if it's a 2-loss Alabama and an undefeated Cincinnati, that it's going to be Cincinnati. I think they're going to do everything they can to have Alabama in this playoffs, because even if they lose another game, well, their losses are to Georgia, and they hope a top 10 Texas A&M. So how can you penalize them? We've already seen they didn't penalize them for the loss to Texas A&M. I mean, they dropped them to 2. Where's the penalty? Show me the penalty. This has been time served, if you will. And now I don't. How damaging is a loss to Georgia? Do they drop 2 spots?
How would you compare Ohio State's lost to Oregon and Alabama's lost to Texas A&M. I don't know that Texas A&M's not better than Oregon.
Mm-hmm. No,
I don't know that they're comparable. I think.
I'm not asking for Ohio State to be number 2 either. Like be 4, be 5. That's fine. Just have some. Like there should be a cost to losing, and with Alabama there isn't.
I agree.
Alabama beat 12 football teams that had helmets and shoulder pads. So calm down. They've earned it. They're good. Kirk Herbstreit likes us. Our field is blue.
There you go.
That's a joke from an old school video.
Yeah. One of those computer generated. I remember that. It was a lot of fun. I watched Alabama, against LSU, and I think it was obvious that they didn't take LSU seriously. They figured they could just throw their helmets with the A on the side, throw them out there on the field there at Bryant Denny, and everything was going to take care of itself, and it didn't. Jamison Williams, our guy, had his weekly highlight reel play, but otherwise, there's not as much special about that team. As Alabama teams go over the last 12 years of this amazing run, this one's probably around 7 or 8, I would say, if not maybe even a notch below that. So I don't know.
But this is what's tricky about the.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So they had the rush for 6 yards against LSU. Second time this year they've been under 100 yards. And how I know this Alabama team isn't as good as past teams other than the results. Nick Saban is being nice as heck to them and is being as gracious as possible after wins, saying, this is a good win. LSU's tough. And this is not the first time he's done that this year. He's done that at least one other time, and just being, gosh darn, we're a young team, and we appreciate the wins. In past years, you beat LSU by like 3 or whatever, he's going to be hot as heck because he knows they should be doing better. Yeah. Now he knows, like, this is about as good as we are, which tells you how good he thinks they are. And it's like, there's concern there.
Yeah, he was fritzing out on the sidelines a couple times in that game. And, he gets like that when he sees things kind of starting to go a little bit haywire. And it was obvious he was not happy. And I find it funny to see the passion that Big Itty Cookie Monster Orgeron was coaching with on the other side. I mean, he was reaming people out left and right. They got to be looking at him and like, bro, you're going to be out of my life in about 3 weeks. Why should I give a bleep one way or the other what you say? It was really kind of hilarious, but I don't know.
Well, they played hard for him, and had they elected to kick a field goal the previous series, they would have been in line to kick a field goal to send it to OT that final drive. So I'm not criticizing the call because they were going for broke. What do they got to lose? Go for it on 4th down, 2 consecutive series, but it didn't work out, and they could have been kicking the game-tying field goal there at the end of the game. But Alabama didn't get penalized for losing, or for an unimpressive win against a 4-5 team like other teams get penalized for. They're starting to collect some of those. Florida, now LSU, similar to Oklahoma's string of unimpressive wins against decent teams, okay teams. The thing about the rankings, and you guys well know this, it's tricky though, because you can chase your tail around in who beat who and who beat who, because we've got 8-1 and 17 and 2 teams out there that pretty much are the teams that people would point to as that's an impressive win. Well, those teams have only lost 1 and 2 games. So there's only so many teams that have beaten those teams. I counted 13 6-3 teams in the Power 5. So that's tough to sort through those in doing my own rankings. And, I'll give you one situation, case in point, Mississippi State. Okay, they were 17 in the committee's rankings last week. They're 17. They play at Arkansas, who obviously must have been just out of the committee's rankings last week, because now they're in the rankings. They're a 5-3 team at the time. They're now 6-3. So Mississippi State loses that game. They miss a field goal at the gun that would have sent it into overtime. It's a game that knocked them out of the rankings, but you get 2 comparable teams. They play a game that hedges on a missed field goal on the last play of the game. What do you do with that? what do you do with ranked teams losing games to other ranked teams? Aren't they kind of what they're supposed to do? And they're pretty much the same team we thought they were going into the game, but the record's just worse now.
How can you expect a rankings committee to do something like rank teams? I mean, that's just a really big ask. I mean, I for one am offended that you would even make such a comment. I mean, I don't know why you think that they could be able to figure that out. Obviously, if you're in the SEC, it just means more. So just, put them all in the East.
I think my thing is they get to tell us how good a win is by putting teams where they want in the rankings. All of those 6-3 teams, they get to tell us, well, say Pitt, for instance, they're 6-3. They're not, but we're going to put them at 16. That makes the win that, whoever had against them even better, as opposed to, well, we could just leave them at 24. They get to tell us how good these wins are with their opinions and with their rankings. So they control all of this. It's they can make a win better or worse by simply leaving a team out. Ohio State's win over Penn State is not as good as Alabama's win over or whatever. It's like they get their judge, jury, they're the defense attorney, they're the prosecutor, and they get to also write the narrative. And but it's a playoff. So here we are complaining about 4 teams or 8 teams whittled down to 4. It's like, this is all stuff that I agreed to. It's better than 2 teams. So, but also we're going to talk about it. I mean, come on.
These rankings would be more fair if what actually should happen. What is magical about 25 teams? Is the 26th best team in the country, or they just fall off a cliff? Like I try to stay away from saying ranked wins. I go quality wins, what I consider a quality win. The comparison between number 20 and number 40 in the country is probably razor close. That collection of teams are so close. We should probably rank every team in the country 1 through 130. And therefore there's no difference between 25 and 26 and 38 and 39 and 92 and 93. It's all the same.
Why are there only 3 medals at the Olympics? Why don't we have a 4th and a 5th? I mean, yeah, somewhere, I guess, but I agree that, it's like in recruiting rankings, whether or not it's a Rivals 100 or a 247 top 247 or whatever it is they do over there. What's the difference between 100 and 101? What's the difference between we're going to hand out 35 stars and you're 31, so you're 4 stars? I mean, it's really negligible. And, I understand, but I'm not here for a 3-hour show as we sit there and we go through the entirety of the Sun Belt and having to hear where they're ranked and listen to them try and come up with, well, they had a really good win against this NAIA school or what. I mean, I'm not here for that.
Well, we wouldn't have to have a show to explain all the selections, but and I would not be the one to do the rankings there. All right. We will go back to the Nebraska game. There was the good, there was the bad. Tony, we'll start with you, and we've got a question. You could start with the question and then let us know whatever your thoughts are about Nebraska, and certainly putting up 26 points and bogging down in the red zone a number of times. But Ed Rogers is saying, will CJ ever get over his fear of contact? Well, that leads us to just basic running the football question concerning the quarterback.
Here's my thing, and I reject this entire notion. No offense, Ed. You can't play quarterback at Ohio State or any major program and be afraid of contact. If you're afraid of contact, you can't stand in the pocket, you can't survey, you can't go from one read to, because people are coming to hurt you. And that alone means that you are okay with that. And you don't want to get sacked. Tom Brady doesn't want to get sacked. Tom Brady doesn't run. He doesn't, no quarterback wants to just go run and get hit. But also they understand that can happen anytime they drop back. So it's not just he's not running because he's afraid of contact. You wouldn't be playing the position at this level. Kids get away with it in high school. You play it at this level and you are going to get hit. You throw a 60-yard bomb and it's a touchdown. You still end up on your butt, on your face, on your back from getting hit. And so you have to stand in there. And so I know people want him to run more. He ran some more. It netted the Buckeyes rushed for 90 yards against Nebraska, having CJ Stroud as part of the run game. It's more than just CJ Stroud right now. It's also blocking, it's execution. I think he's had one time this year where he should have just kept the ball and scrambled, and he threw it instead, and it was an interception. Stroud, every other time he throws the ball, it's a first down. He scrambles, he looks for somebody downfield, and it's an easy completion. People get upset about that. It's like because they want him to pick up 4 yards instead of 11. We got to, you can have the toughest quarterback ever. If he can't complete a pass, JT Barrett was the toughest quarterback Ohio State has had since the 60s when everybody, wrestled cows and punched horses. JT Barrett was tough as hell. Could he beat Alabama in a national championship game? Could he beat Clemson in a playoff game? Did he have the arm to throw and complete? Maybe in 2014 he could have done it. You can be tough as heck, but if you can't complete passes, you're just not going to get it done. And I mean, the evidence continues to pile up. Like quarterbacks have to be able to throw the ball. He doesn't get paid to be a running back. He blah, blah, blah. And people are upset about that. I don't have a problem with that. He's not. He's right. He came here to throw the football. And that's my tangent. The win over Nebraska, anytime you get a win on the road in the Big Ten, there's no need to apologize for it. Do they need to clean some stuff up? Yes. Now's the time to get it done. But it's November. It's the Big Ten. That's not going to be easy.
I'll jump in. I'll kind of dovetail off what Tony says there. He's not paid to run the ball. I mean, I think that the way that the quote kind of made its way to social was an incomplete quote in terms of what it was, and people were quick to kind of jump on him and question his intestinal fortitude, if you will, about wanting to get out there and run it. I think, though, that when you do so many things of where you're reading keys in terms of the offense, and it's never going to be QB keeper. He's never going to call his own number on the read. Why do that? Because all it ends up being at that point is just fluff and window dressing. So, all right, fine. Run more play action. Just run straight play action if you're going to do some of these things. Don't waste your time with saying, maybe I'm going to run. Maybe I'm going to run. And he's not going to run. And everybody knows he's not going to run. I would like to see an offense personally where there is a little bit more Q run, but that's because that's what I've seen in covering this team for so many years. So I'm familiar with it. I go back to that. I certainly can go back just a few years and be like, this team runs the quarterback way too much. They need to start throwing the ball downfield. Well, now you have it in the other direction. But I think that some of the things they're doing structurally really sets itself up to potentially having the Q run. And if you're not going to have the Q run, fine. Don't have the Q run, but don't sit there and have the window dressing that makes it look like you're going to not have it. I mean, how many times can I sit there and pull your finger and you're going to fart? And I'm going to stop pulling your damn finger because I know what's going to happen.
Yeah, positives, I thought the defense played outstanding against Nebraska. Just gave up the 2 long pass plays where it seems like Bryson Shaw, the deep safety, may have gotten deked into coming up to play another route, and Lathan Ransom was unable to have the coverage over the top in man coverage out of the slot. So, those things happen, I guess. And, you take away those 2 plays, I think Martinez threw for like 243, 248, something like that. Take away those 2 plays, and it was only 120 yards passing, around 100 yards rushing. So nothing to write home about. Nebraska scored 17 points, and they left some points on the field. They missed 2 short field goals, obviously. One wasn't necessarily short. It was like 35, 40 yards, I guess. The other one was a chip shot, that the worst looking 33-yard field goal I've ever seen in my life. He hit it. And first of all, I didn't understand why Frost kicked the field goal in that situation. It was 4th and 4 at maybe the 17, 18-yard line, something like that. And they were down 6 points. And here you are, you're 3-6 on the season. Not that your record should ever necessarily come into game thinking of, what you're going to do. But you need to go for the win in that situation. And, if you can't pick up 4 yards on 4th down, then maybe you weren't going to win this game anyway. But
especially when your kickers are hitting 50% of their kicks.
Yeah, wasn't an automatic kick by any means. And the third down play, I mean, this is why Nebraska can't have nice things, as one of Kevin's favorite pet comments goes, because on the third down play, again, I was in the far end zone shooting Ohio State defensively, looking at me. You guys would know better than me from the high shot. It appeared that the tight end was wide open for a first down, and he threw it behind him, and it was incomplete. And as one of the commentators, RJ Young or somebody, said that, here you are on the porch, getting ready to put it in the house, and you miss him on third down, and then you go for a field goal on fourth down. And so that was a little bit of a head scratcher to me, why Frost at 3-6 on the season was playing for, a field goal here and then maybe a field goal later to force overtime or whatever, when a touchdown in either scenario gives you the win. The other thing was the quarterback being hit and fumbling with 1:45 to go, and Ryan Day kind of cavalierly saying, well, we run it, we throw it, we mix it around, we do this, we do that. They were in kind of an in-between area there because Nebraska still had all 3 timeouts. It was first down, and they probably needed another 12 to 15 yards to get it in safe field goal range, and certainly needed another 2 or 3 first downs to score the touchdown. So I can understand on one point when you have the nation's efficiency leader, or one of them throwing the ball in that situation, why you would throw it. But again, you put the ball in harm's, put the game in basically in peril. Just last week, Jerron Cage in the same situation picked it up and took it the other way for a touchdown. Had a Nebraska linebacker or safety or cornerback gotten to that ball first, they were gone. And, you lose the game potentially on that play. So, that was a tough one. They've been good in pass protection up until that play. I don't know if you're ready for that screenshot that I sent you, Mark, but I had a guy who I was just looking at Twitter, and he posted on Twitter here just a little bit ago, I don't want Stroud running the ball until the CFP. Kill me in the replies if you want, but I'll die on this hill. This was the guy's comment. Here it is on my phone. If you can read it, I don't know. I don't even know the guy who posted it, but seems like half of Ohio State Buckeye Nation wants him to run the ball, and half of them wants him to keep plays alive and keep throwing it, at least until you get into a championship game. There, yeah, you had it on the screen. We were just above it, but at any rate, my feeling on that is the interception, the first one he threw, as I was there at the game and as I watched it replayed on the big board, is he rolls out to the right and he's got 8 yards of open green field turf in front of him. And there's the screenshot. I just saw this pop up on TweetDeck 15 minutes ago. I go, this is just crystallizes our thoughts on this matter perfectly. This guy is telling the world, go to hell if you think my quarterback, that's my quarterback, man. I can't have him getting bunged up here out here playing Purdue and Nebraska. I need him for the Michigan, Wisconsin, Oregon, and Georgia games in succession. So at any rate, that was a case where he needed to run the ball. He needed to tuck the ball and not try and fit it into a tight window along the sideline where only one guy could get to it. So to me, if he takes off and gets out of bounds and gets 6 yards, it's second and 4 at the 11-yard line, and you are still going to probably score a touchdown. What he did was he ended the series with an interception. And one last thing, a very troubling thing for second week in a row, terrible start for Ohio State. Just miserably terrible start. Both sides of the ball. Had the fourth down catch by Ruckert. Some people with stop action, including myself, have a photo of him with the ball in his hands and his knee on the ground, but then it comes out as he tumbles, forward, whatever. They didn't stop to look at it, but I was surprised when it came out. I was like, what? I thought he had that. So Their kid made a great play, though. That kid's a good player. The guy who Reimer, I think, came back, and the linebacker, you called his name the entire game. So a lot of good, a little bit of bad. Road win at Nebraska. I want to tell you, I came away so impressed with Nebraska. 84,000 people losing their mind for a 3-6 football team. You don't see support like that maybe 2 other places in the country. So I remember Iowa had the same type of support in the mid-90s when they were terrible, and they got through it, and they've had better football last 2 decades. And Nebraska, this 20-year sojourn through the desert may be coming to an end sooner rather than later.
Kevin, your thoughts on Nebraska, CJ running the ball, red zone issues, whatever you want to attack?
Well, again, I'll just kind of get back to my point of you don't want them to run. Don't run plays that give the look that he may run, because it's just pointless. I mean, it's just dumb to do that. So, I mean, there are 1,000 other ways to go about doing things. Ryan Day, offensive genius. Kevin Wilson, offensive genius. They can do a lot of things there. I just think they need to kind of move away from that. As for the red zone, I think if you clean up some of the penalties, because I think if you go through the 8 Noah Ruggles field goals over the last 2 games, penalties have been a major factor in terms of what's happened there. Ohio State has been Ohio State's own worst enemy. And I'm kind of reading the comments and people talking about the belief of 4 tackles and a center out there. Do they have their best, do they have their best guys out there? That offensive line is really good when Matt Jones is out there. And Matt Jones is a guard. So, taking somebody off the field is never an easy thing to do, but do you go to somebody like Paris Johnson and say, your future's at tackle, son? You need to be ready to fill in one of 4 positions if we need to push you in there. But we're gonna be better right now with Matt Jones at this other guard position. Do you do something like that moving forward? Does that help there? I don't know if I've watched the play calls on all those red zone stop downs that they've dealt with, and they're just not as, I don't know. I'm not Ross Fulton over at Buckeye Scoop in terms of knowing everything structurally, but it just looks like it's very vanilla. It doesn't look very creative. And let me tell you this, let's hope Ohio State doesn't get to a 9 overtime game, because if they can't punch it in a lot of these instances, how are they going to do it come 3rd overtime when you're having to go just for shots of 2 for 2-pointers? So that's problematic. And one other thing I saw in the comments, yes, there have been a lot of holding calls that have not been called in Ohio State's way. I went through and looked at the penalties over the last several games. It's not a lot of holding calls called in general, though Ohio State seems to be on the wrong end more than the other way around. Yes, you do turn those things into the league. Sure, it goes in front of Bill Carollo. They re-educate their officials a little bit and then wash, rinse, repeat.
Yakov 22, basically spelling out the demise of the Wolverines. So if Penn State wins, meaning Michigan loses, Michigan will then come off the rails. I think that's the message here. They will lose at Maryland to Ohio State and then headed to the Outback Bowl. Michigan 8-4. I don't even know in this conference if they will get to the Outback Bowl with that kind of record. Maybe not. It's kind of on the borderline, but also appreciate that, Yakov. APEP Jones. Okay, just 2 planned runs, 2 deep passes in the first half for Stroud. Will do wonders against defenses, meaning, a couple more planned runs, keep the defense honest, couple deep passes, keep the defense honest. Will do wonders. Thank you so much for the super chat there.
Getting Garrett Wilson back potentially this week will help them out. I mean, Jackson Smith and Jigba had a Herculean effort against Nebraska, but you don't have somebody like Garrett Wilson on the sidelines and expect there not to be at least a little bit of a hiccup. So I think that certainly could help with the downfield effort.
Tony, you got a question here.
Tom's Met jumping in asking, why doesn't Tom run the ball? Tom is a very lazy and also soft and does not like contact. So that's probably that answer there. Thank you for that super chat, Tom's Mets hat. I do I do want to go back to the last one about the two QB runs and two deep shots. Like they don't call quarterback runs like as just plays. Like they're not going to call a quarterback draw with CJ Stroud. I don't think they've done it all year. That's not something they want to do. But with the read option, giving him the option, that's something that they did a couple of times in this last game. The speed option that they did as well. I agree. Just show it a couple times. The deep stuff just depends on if the safeties are back or not. If there's a safety back there, they're probably not going to do it, and so they may call for it, but then the coverage isn't there, so CJ Stroud won't unleash it. But yeah, I have no problem with softening them up that way, just making sure that they know that these two things can come, and just give them some looks, and then they have to deal with it.
Steve, we got Purdue coming to town.
Yeah, how exciting!
Yes,
how exciting!
Yeah,
the Fighting Jeff Brahms. They are, playing outstanding offensive football with that throwing attack, and I am interested to see. I didn't get to watch a whole lot of that game last week. We were covering the interviews, and then I was in a car driving from Lincoln back to Omaha where I was staying, and I'm listening to it on Sirius. Really, it was kind of a cut-in. That game was coming down to the end, and so was the Cincinnati game, and so was the TCU game and the Baylor game. So it was all kind of coming to a head at one time. So it was kind of getting drips and drabs here and there. But it sounded like Purdue was out to a 21-7 lead. Michigan State tied it up, and then Purdue, on a barrage of field goals in the second half, kind of put it away, and Michigan State wasn't able to stay with them. So, to me, it sounds like Purdue's not a team that's going to try and run the ball. Ohio State's pass defense is going to be extremely tested. Is anybody up for the challenge of containing David Bell in the two games against top 5 teams, Iowa and Michigan State? He's got something like 28 or 30 catches for well over 400 yards, I believe. So that's something. Aiden O'Connell threw for over 520 yards. And I believe I read it was the 5th most yards ever by a quarterback in a Big Ten conference game. So obviously they're in a groove when it comes to throwing the football. So the things I come back to are pressure from the Ohio State front four, which has been outstanding here the last 4 games. 19 sacks for Ohio State. 19 of their 33 sacks for the season have come in the last 4 games. The other 14 were in the first 5 games. So they've really ramped up the pressure, gone from averaging about 3 a game to close to 5 a game here in this last 4 games. And Tyreek Smith is having an out-of-body experience, it seems, every week for the Buckeyes. Zach Harrison is getting after people. Haskell Garrett was limited this past week, some type of an injury issue with him. He played less than 20 plays, I believe. So need to get him healthy. But pressure is 1. Locating and covering David Bell is 2. And 3, above all else, Michigan State at least forced them. I think they had to kick 4 field goals last week as well, and scoring 40 points. So however that shook out in the red zone, keep them out of the end zone, make them kick field goals, because they're going to move it seems, between the 20s. And, we'll see from there. Is their defense ready for what Ohio State's going to unleash on them? That's a big question. And Ohio State, above all else, has got to get back to running the football. I crunched some numbers on that today. In the first 4 Big Ten games, Ohio State averaged about 190 yards and 6 yards per carry. First 4 Big Ten games. The last 2 games against Penn State and Nebraska, the average has been about 120 yards and just under 4 yards per carry, like 3.9. So tremendous difference these last 2 games in their inability to run the ball when they want to run the ball. Yes, at the end of the Nebraska game, Henderson did have runs, I think, of 11 and 22 yards on the last series, but those were his 2 best runs of the day. And it came when they had to have it. Obviously, move the sticks, keep the clock rolling. But now you need to be able to do that from the first quarter on. Maybe that'll go a little better against Purdue. But George Karlaftis, I think, is the guy that must be blocked. He is a one-man wrecking crew for Purdue on their front. And, in that Kerrigan mold of years ago, that type of a guy that they have that is just a one-man machine up front.
Yeah, the Karlaftis battle will be a nice preview for what Ohio State will face on both sides against Michigan's defensive ends.
Yep.
But, if you take away the 2010 game, these two teams have split the last 8 games. I mean, they've split the last 6 games with Purdue and Ohio State. So there is, for whatever reason, things are always have been iffy between these two teams, and they probably shouldn't be. And yet here Ohio State is 4-4 over the last 8 matchups, again, throwing out the redacted 2010 game. But
I love that word. I love using that word in this case.
But I saw a question: who's going to defend David Bell? Like, it's not just going to be one guy, I don't think. I mean, they'll probably try to give him some help, but whatever side of the field he lines up on, it'll be Denzel Burke or Cam Brown or Sevyn Banks. I'm looking forward to seeing what Denzel Burke does. Like, this is going to be his biggest test. And this is, if you see somebody, you see a cornerback giving up some yards to David Bell, that's what David Bell does. And that's what Purdue does, because they target him, probably at least a dozen times a game. And so they know how to butter the bread. They know where the bread is located. They know where the butter is located. They've got the butter knife. It's not a hard butter right out of the fridge. It's room temperature.
It's ketchup butter.
It's you can just squeeze the butter on. That's a great.
And that's always tricky. You got to be thinking beforehand. Let's get the butter out of the fridge early, because then it sucks when you're ready for the bread and the butter, and you're ripping up your bread trying to spread the butter.
There's no bread being torn here. The butter was put out on Friday. The bread is nice as well. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that one. Ohio State, I mean, Steve touched on all of these different things that I'm just going to repeat, but Ohio State rushed for 90 yards last week. They need to do obviously better than that. I saw somebody mention all of the pass play calls. Ryan Day was asked about that this week, and he's like, a bunch of those are RPOs. They're run pass option. It depends on what the defense is doing, and they're forcing passes. So it's going to look a little out of whack. And also the wide passes outside, those are essentially running plays. So when they throw those screens out wide, it counts as a pass, but the coaches themselves count it as a run. So I think it was 54 passes to 30 rushes, but somehow it's actually closer to being balanced, because however many of those, say 10 to 15 of those plays are RPOs, and they could have been runs if the defense had been backed up and allowing for that. But it's still very, very, very out of character for Ohio State to throw that much when they're not losing by 3 touchdowns in West Lafayette or in Iowa City like they have in the past. And so just get back to running the ball a little bit, trust your run, maybe do some of it more outside the tackles than between the tackles, and see what happens there. And I do wonder if at some point they know Noah Ruggles is good now. Will they continue to rely on him? I mentioned this on my own podcast maybe earlier in the week or so. Would it be better for Ohio State's red zone offense if Noah Ruggles was bad and they would realize, we're going to have to use this 4th down for offense rather than just settling for another 37-yard field goal?
All right, I got a lot of little factoids that I'll throw out. A lot of this will appear in my Tail of the Tape that runs tomorrow on Buckeye Scoop. Steve is exactly right about Bell having his best games again in the biggest games, something like 4-something yardage wise, 20+ receptions, both double-figure games. Everything going on there, but he only has one game with multiple touchdown receptions, and that's UConn. And UConn is horrible. But so for whatever reason, he gets a lot of yardage, a couple of 200+ yard games, but it's only found the end zone once in every game, or 0 except for UConn. Purdue as a team cannot run the ball. In 9 games, they have 7 of the 9 games they've not rushed for 100 yards. The only time that they've rushed for more than 120 yards was once again against UConn. They ran for about $116 against Nebraska with 1 touchdown. Now Purdue, that's not a huge indicator of their success in the series. And I looked at the series between Ohio State and Purdue going all the way back through the 2000 game, which was 13 games. In Purdue's wins, they average 104 yards on the ground, and their losses, they average 60. And then overall, it's about 77. So it's not like they're necessarily running a lot. 161 is a high water mark. That was in the 18 game, and a lot of that came on a DJ Knox 40-yard touchdown. But I think it's more important for Ohio State as a running team. Ohio State averages about 159 yards a game against Purdue. In its losses, though, it's only averaging 104 yards. And in its wins, in the average game is 138, 159 in wins, 104 in losses. So Ohio State has to come back out and do a lot better than what it's done running the ball. The last time that Ohio State was held to less than 100 yards in back-to-back games, 2018, Minnesota, and the second game being Purdue. So run the ball, find success, win the game, profit. Drink beer.
20-point spread, 20 and a half. I was
Sounds like a
expecting
lot.
like 9 or 10.
It sounds like a lot. I'm
It
not
sure
sure.
does.
The other
Vegas
thing is Ohio
knows.
State's playing at home, and Ohio State at home has been lights out. Their string of winning conference games by double digits was snapped. Obviously, Penn State, they only won that one by 9. But to my recollection, they'd won a bunch of games in a row by double digits in conference play. I don't know. I don't recall last year. Was there a close conference game last year?
Indiana,
Indiana
yeah.
was a 7-point game.
42-35.
So that's about the only one, though, in the last 3 years. So because they beat everybody the year before by double digits, which they won 10 games by double digits that year, which is the most dominant season any Big Ten teams ever had against other Big Ten opponents, to my understand. Well, certainly nobody had ever beaten 10 of them in one season before that happened. So that was something, and to beat them all by double digits. This year they've won 2 games in a row now by 9 points. But as I was getting back to, typically at home, Ohio State is pretty dominant in these settings. So I think that's what the odds makers are looking at. Again, Purdue has nothing to lose, and in fact, they having lost to Wisconsin and in Minnesota, which are two of the 4 teams that they are tied with. They beat Iowa. The tiebreaker is not in their favor. I mean, as of today, they wouldn't be going to Indianapolis because of the 1-2 record in those games. They would have been eliminated. So they need to win out and get a lot of help. It would appear they need Wisconsin and Minnesota, who play each other. They need the winner of that game to lose another game, and they have to win out. So to get to Indianapolis, so they need a lot of help. But they're playing for a division championship themselves, and so will Michigan State and Michigan the next couple of weeks. So the preliminaries are over for Ohio State. Every drive, every play, every possession, every throw, everything that happens at this point is championship caliber level importance to my way of thinking, and particularly playoff. I mean, you, as Coach Day said, turn around and you lose one of these games, you don't take it seriously. You lose one of these games very easily. So you have to take every, the importance of every series and every play is, of the essence at this point. There's no leeway left for Ohio State, which is a tough place to be. I mean, in November, if things aren't clicking, but thankfully to them, they've got a lot of good things going their way, a lot of positive trending, things. Stroud's playing fabulous on the whole. You have 3 of the top 10 wide receivers in college football, it appears, which is great. You've got a decent to very good offensive line. You've got great pressure from the quarterbacks, and you've got a young freshman cornerback, Denzel Burke, who was touched on there, who's just been nothing short of fabulous bang-up job as a true freshman. Batted away a deep pass this past week against Nebraska. I think everybody was kind of holding their breath on that one, because if they complete that one, then it's Nebraska is right there. So to my way of thinking, and special teams are really coming into the forefront right now for Ohio State. Mirko hit a big punt when they needed it. The field goals are best in the country as of right now. And, you lose Wilson, he doesn't play, and Smith-Njigba gets in there and has a 20-yard punt return. So Igbuka, if anybody ever kicks off a ball that he can field, he's got potential to break one at any moment as well. So a lot of positive indicators and a lot of good things to hang your hat on for this Ohio State team as it enters this stretch. I would put them, again, the result last week, not what anybody wanted. Obviously, a 9-point win against a team with a losing record, but that's going to end up 3-9, it appears. But the best 3-7 team in football, was Nebraska as of right now. They should be ranked 25th.
The FPI practically has them there. Some of these computer rankings practically have Nebraska in the top 25. Folks, join us on Patreon. You get my top 25 picks. I pick all the top 25 games plus some more. 13-8 last week against the spread, and about 61% for the season. Do the math. If you know anything about wagering, you'll make a few bucks there. 61% against the spread. And guess what? These three selected 12-pack as well.
Nebraska leads the nation in single-digit losses.
Yes. I made this statement during my Big Ten power rankings. Give Nebraska an extra touchdown in every game, and they're the best team in the conference.
They're 10-0.
Before we get you guys' picks, we'll finish up with our predictions. But these guys have delivered every week. And for the last hour, so we want to certainly find out what they've got going on, and people listen up, starting with Kevin. What you got, Kevin?
Froze for a second. Am I supposed to be giving a prediction that I haven't written now, or what am I working on?
No, you were supposed to be telling us where we can find you.
Okay. I just was like, oh boy, I don't have a prediction ready yet. I'm over at BuckeyeScoop.com. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Noon. You can find my podcast, The Big Me Kickoff. Right now, it's running generally on Fridays. I keep promising to release a second episode a week. Hasn't quite happened yet. And as I said earlier, my big piece of the week, Tale of the Tape, will come out tomorrow about 11 a.m. Eastern. Probably about 4,500 words talking Buckeyes and Boilermakers. I go through a lot of history over the last 13 games in this series, going back to 2000, and make a couple picks in there.
Where can we find you, Tony?
You can find me at BuckeyeScoop.com as well. Podcast, Buckeye Weekly Podcast, is essentially daily at this point during the season. You can find me on Twitter at Tony Gerdeman. And that's about it for now. I'm always around. Feel free to reach out.
Steve.
At Steve Hellwagon on Twitter. As you can see there, it's spelled with an E-N, which is a little bit different, I think, from how most people would think it is. And no, I'm not Jim Stillwagon. I did not play for Ohio State. I get that question. Didn't you play for the Buckeyes? Like, no. He played there in 1968, and I was born in 1968. So, I have to set that record straight every now and then. Yes, I look like I'm 70 years old. So, at any rate, there and bucknuts.com, and I've got my hands full right now. I am drinking water out of a hose doing this fire hose with this basketball and football overlap. Any of you crazy people that also like Ohio State basketball, about 10 of you, I think, probably watched that game last night with half horror and half delight to see that they did win the game, but it came on a made shot with 0.3 of a second to go, and they beat a Mid-American opponent 67-66. And covering all aspects of that, today is the signing day for basketball. 5 new players signing with the Buckeyes today, and the season is well underway. Another game Friday night, and then, of course, obviously the football game on Saturday against Purdue, and I may be throwing a tailgate party for that. So watch my Facebook and my Twitter, and we may throw out the welcome mat for anybody that wants to come down to the tailgate party, perhaps on Saturday. We'll see what's going on with that.
And while Steve has collected many illustrious awards during his career, I don't believe any of them include the Outland Trophy.
No.
Okay.
No. I was not an All-American at Ohio State, unless we were talking about number of last calls made at the beer stube, or I don't know, keg stands or whatever else. But yeah.
Do we want to make predictions? You guys ready?
Nope.
No predictions.
I mean, if they want to, I mean, just pick me third, because I'm trying to. I'm going to write mine. I actually went in to look to put my picks in for your product, and the page wasn't up to date yet. It was still last week, so I of course went in and changed all of my picks to the right picks.
Well, I will get that out very soon. And if you guys want to save your picks for your other platforms, that's certainly fine. But if you guys want to make your picks.
What comes to my mind is like 38-24, something goofy like that. Just Ohio State 5, Purdue 3 in terms of touchdowns, something like that. Ohio State's got to get off this thing where they're only scoring 2 touchdowns. That's got to go. They got to get back to putting the ball in the end zone and shooting off the fireworks, and Olave, Wilson, Smith and the Jigba, Henderson, one apiece, and then somebody else gets a random one. That they got to get back to doing that, because if they're not doing that, their margin for error really, really shrinks up pretty quick. Because this is not a vintage Ohio State defense. It's a good enough Ohio State defense, but they've got to score touchdowns to be the team that they need to be, and this is a game to get that straightened out.
Yeah, I also think Purdue needs to score touchdowns, so I don't know how involved with field goals they're going to be. Originally, I wrote down 35-20, and then I talked myself out of Purdue kicking field goals, and I have made it 38-21 with Ohio State. They get the offense back on track. Playing at home will help do that. Playing Purdue's passing defense, I think, will also help do that, provided they pass block. I just don't see Ohio State stopping, holding Purdue to 10 or whatever. I'm pretty much exactly what Steve said, 5 touchdowns to 3, and then is there a field goal or 2 in there as well? So 38-21, Ohio State, which is still 3 points under the over-under.
I'm kind of sitting there thinking as these guys were talking, I'm at 34-21 Ohio State. I see 4 touchdowns to 3 with a couple field goals, because after 4 field goals in one game and 4 field goals in the next game, even if they turn things around, I think they still may end up settling for 2 field goals at that point. I think that Aiden O'Connell, and David Bell hook up once. I think that maybe one of the other receivers, there's a very talented tight end for Purdue. I think that they get another score there, and then you always want to kind of throw a fluky one in there. I think Ohio State's going to be better running the ball. I think we're going to see a little bit better balance, but we're not going to see a situation of where Ohio State's just going to break out and look like it's playing Rutgers or Maryland. So 34-21, Ohio State winning this one, and people will be white-knuckling it going into Michigan State.
200 plus on the line at the end of the show. You guys know what to do. You've missed most of the show, so please wait for it to process and post. That'll take about 15 to 20 minutes, and catch the entire show where these guys break it down from start to finish. Kevin Noon, Buckeyes Scoop. Tony Gerdeman, Buckeyes Scoop. Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts 247 Sports. These guys make it happen. We hope that you will consider contributing. You can also, in addition to the super chat right now, Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App, just make a notation, Ohio State, right there at Mark Rogers TV. We will see everybody back here next Wednesday, but of course, subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live, because at times we've got to turn the schedule upside down and reschedule. So it's typically Wednesday, 1:30 Eastern, but again, hit that bell for the notifications. Guys, appreciate it. Enjoy the game. Should be a good one.
Yep.
Thanks.